it just occurred to us that, yes, we want to keep talking to leaders and managers, but seeing and knowing that nothing was really going to change. They're not really invested in reducing the amount of bias that women are facing. So we also want to talk directly to women. Women in leadership positions are sometimes teetering on the edge, of a cliff that they can't see. The metaphor of the glass cliff, you see it in a bunch of different domains, acknowledging that what needs to really change is the system and the organisation.
Welcome to yet another episode of Voices of a Business School, hosted by AVT Business School. In the studio today, we're pleased to welcome Raina Brands, Professor of Organizational Behavior and founder of Career Equally, interviewed by AVT's own Jesper Bergman. In this episode, we're diving into the metaphor of what is known as the glass cliff. Raina let us in on her expertise in organizational behavior, women in business, and gender bias of the workplace. Raina claims that once you become familiar with the phenomenon of the glass cliff, you will notice it everywhere. We'll let you be the judge of that after this episode. But for now, thanks for tuning in and let's dive into it.
We're here today with Raina Brands, who has the most cool name I've ever heard about. But you're actually from Australia. You will hear her voice in just a minute. But whereabout did you actually grow up in Australia?
I grew up in Brisbane, Queensland, which is a city halfway up the east coast of Australia. So very far from London, where I live, and very far from Copenhagen. I'm a long way from home. No, so I did my undergraduate and master's in psychology in Brisbane, Australia. This is very strange to many Europeans and Americans, but in Australia, most people don't go away for university. So I lived at home as an undergraduate, going to classes at a university near my house. It's very normal to do that.
And choosing your main area of study, how did you come about that?
Well, when I was leaving high school, at that point you just come out with a rank, basically a rank with all exiting students, and it's a number from 1 to 25, and that dictates what course you can get into. So there's a big thick book full of all the university courses you can do. I just went through it and crossed out courses until it was down to law or psychology. And I thought law would be pretty boring. So that's how I chose psychology. It's not a particularly thoughtful origin story, but I loved it. It's a very broad discipline, much broader than most people think. I was very happy to devote 6 years of life to studying it, yeah.
Great. You also were working afterwards, your
right.
master's in Australia?
Yeah, that's right. So to call yourself a psychologist in Australia, you have to do, well, I don't know what it is now, but at the time you had to do at least 6 years of study. So after my undergraduate, I started doing a master's in organizational psychology, and at the same time started working as a consultant. Those few years of working as a consultant kind of cured me of that life. It certainly wasn't for me. I'd always wanted to do a PhD from pretty much from when I found out there was such a thing as a PhD when I was about 8 years old. I'd always wanted to get a doctorate. Yeah, so while I was consulting, that call back to academia got stronger and stronger, and eventually I listened to it.
So how come did you decide to move all the way to the UK for that?
I think I just had a sense that I wanted to go to prestigious university. So I started looking around for programs in the US and the UK. I decided I wanted to be in the UK, and the business school at Cambridge, Judge Business School, I really liked the masters they were offering. I wanted the opportunity to explore something beyond psychology, so the masters I took was in strategy, innovation, organisation, so thinking about more of those organisational issues. I ended up staying there for quite a while. I went there after my masters. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to do my PhD, and fortunate enough that a world leader in the topic I now study, social networks in organisations, joined the school just after I started my PhD, and so I had probably the most eminent expert in the world at the school available to supervise me. I was very lucky.
Is that still your main passion?
Yeah, so now I love psychology. I think it's such a powerful lens in so many situations. And I'd always, all of my research had been done on gender, so gender stereotyping, particularly in the workplace. I think for me, just the individual focus of psychology, it just wasn't enough. It didn't answer all my questions. And when I arrived at Cambridge, I was looking for another lens. And when I was introduced to social networks by a very loud marketing professor from Australia who was working at Cambridge, he gave me a book to read on social networks. And as soon as I read it, I was like, this is the thing I've been looking for. In my academic life, I still use both. Social networks is much more of a sociological tradition, but in my research, I blend psychological theories with this structural social networks approach.
So after you finished your PhD, you also worked at Judge Business School?
Right, so I did my PhD there, and then I was fortunate enough to get a research associate position. Then I joined London Business School, and last year I joined University College London School of Management.
You've also founded careerequally.com, where you have posted a number of different articles with research about equality. And I was really keen when I read the glass cliff, because I've not heard about the glass cliff before. And it's really interesting also to read your statement about why you actually founded this, to educate and empower women and the leaders they work for to de-bias their careers. You know, coming from your background, studying social networks, but then also this bit, you know, how did that happen?
Yeah, so this was the brainchild of one of my friends and collaborators in academia, Anita Ratan. So I think we worked quite closely together as collaborators, and obviously closely together when we were both at London Business School. We were having very similar experiences. So obviously we both research gender, so we're very immersed in the literature about all the different ways in which women experience discrimination and bias and stereotyping in the workplace. This is all very clear to us. And we were having a very similar experience in that it was typically the women in the executive MBAs who were just a little bit older, perhaps getting into their first or second leadership role, and they would come into our office and they would describe experiences to us that were very clearly bias, stereotyping, that they hadn't framed in that way. For them, it was just a really confusing experience. So experiences like, I've always been such a top performer, and now suddenly there's doubt. People have always liked me, and suddenly people are telling me I need to change my style or tone it down. And this is a very confusing experience when you first start to encounter this as a woman. It is very confusing. For Anita and I, it's not confusing at all. We know exactly what is happening, because we have all the frames and the academic models and the academic research that we know this happens to women all the time. We know why it's happening. We know what sort of stereotypes they're violating and what sort of pushback they're getting. So we're having that experience a lot. And then we're also having this experience of often having the opportunity to talk to leaders and managers in organizations about what they were doing and giving them advice, and seeing and knowing that nothing was really going to change. They're not really invested in reducing the amount of bias that women are facing. It just occurred to us that, yes, we want to keep talking to leaders and managers, but we also want to talk directly to women. This sort of thing is not typically part of a business school education. It's certainly not part of a core business school education. You can get it in some popular books, watered down in lots of anecdotes or opinion. We just saw a real gap, a real need to tell women or give women frames for the experiences they were having, help them understand what research evidence says about what biases they face, and as much as possible without blaming them or telling them they needed to fix themselves, but what are some tools and tactics you can use to reduce some of the biases you face, acknowledging that what needs to really change is the system and the organization.
All right, so you can read more about that on careerequally.com, and we'll talk about the glass cliff, because that was one bias that I hadn't come across when I was reading about it. So would you just describe what you mean by a glass cliff?
Right. So we have all heard of the metaphor of the glass ceiling. So this is the idea that women can only progress so highly in an organization, and suddenly, they can see where they want to go. They can see other people, usually men, getting there, but they seem to be stuck behind this invisible barrier. So the metaphor of the glass cliff, which is not coined by me or Anita, this is the research of Michelle Ryan. So this metaphor is the idea that women in leadership positions are sometimes teetering on the edge, of a cliff that they can't see. And so what her research has found is that women are often promoted to risky leadership positions where there is a really high chance of failure. And In fact, we prefer, when the situation is risky, we prefer a woman leader. It's because that situation cues a different set of expectations in us about who's going to succeed. So typically when we think about leadership, we think about men. Think man, think manager. And that's because we think that the skills leaders need, to be directive, authoritative, these are things we stereotypically associate with men. When we're in a crisis situation, we think, and I mean people in general think, well, actually, in this situation, we need somebody who can really draw people together, better people management skills. And these are things that we stereotypically associate with women. So, the ability to be communal and draw people together and foster cohesion. That stereotyped expectation really favors women in this situation. Of course, the problem is these are risky leadership positions, so women often fail. And it's an incredibly robust effect. It doesn't just happen in organizations. We also see that, in political races, women are often asked by their parties to stand for elections in, seats that are very difficult to win. So we see it in a bunch of different domains.
So what do women then, if they don't see this glass cliff, what's your advice then to the women who might be put in these risky positions and they think, okay, I got the job?
Right. So what is our advice for women? So when you're offered a leadership role, our first advice is you really interrogate the position. So make sure you really understand the history, how the position has come about, who is the last incumbent in it, what is the team or organization facing. So if you really interrogate the role, you can get a sense of how risky it is. If it is a really risky position, then maybe you want to think twice about taking it. Another piece of advice that is always good advice is to improve your BATNA, and your BATNA is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So whenever you're in a job negotiation, the more offers you have and the better those offers are, research shows the better is the offer you'll finally negotiate. So if you're offered a leadership position in the context of a job search, the more jobs you have to choose from, the less likely it is you'll feel like you have to take this risky leadership position. And then the final piece of advice we offer is that, look, sometimes you might just feel like you need to take this, right? Because the problem with the glass cliff is it's a catch-22. If you don't take it, you're stuck behind the glass ceiling. And if you do take it, you might fail. So if you think that, on balance, it's better just to get this leadership position on your CV, get out from behind the glass ceiling, okay, but then you need to really create a strong narrative for yourself right from the beginning. So really socialize your decision and the risks that you see, continue to socialize the risks and the obstacles that you face. And so that way, if unfortunately you don't succeed in the position, at least you're not trying to kind of retrospectively socialize or what would be seen as making excuses for your failure.
Yeah. Great advice. And you can read again a lot more about it on careerequally.com.
Yeah. And we've just started partnering with organizations to offer workshops on this topic.
Perfect. So do you feel like there's any movement from also when you started your career in a sense to where we are today?
Yes, there is. Yes, there's always movement and there's always progress. And from when I came of age and started my career to now, I think the big difference I see is just a willingness of both women and men to call out bias when we see it. So things like the Me Too movement, there's such a contrast to the kind of culture that I came of age in. And it's really heartening to see, actually. Yeah, it does make me feel a lot better about the world. I think having said that, if you look at the history of any social movement, including women's rights, it's always push and pull between progress and regression. I think what we see in the United States is a huge pushback against women's rights and a whole bunch of other groups' rights as well. So I think there's always push and pull, and there's always progress coupled with pullback.
Is there any particular change that you like to see in the future?
I do, actually. I mean, one of the things I'm thinking a lot about in my research at the moment is how the structure of the home life affects the kind of careers that women have. And, I've had a couple of viral tweets recently. An irritated thread about, my daycare always calling me and not my partner, unexpectedly went viral. And I did a bunch of interviews with a bunch of different journalists, and the frame is about women and, well, how can we support women to have the careers they want? And one of the things I always try and reframe is this is not just about the women, actually. Yes, I want women to have rewarding careers that are equal to that of, equally competent and capable men. But I also want men to have equally rewarding home lives and family lives. And the current structure, which is kind of more of a traditional breadwinner model where the man earns, the woman does all the childcare or most of the childcare, that's a trap for men too. They don't get all the joy you have when you have a child. So when I'm talking about equality, I'm not just talking about women's equality in the workplace. I'm also talking about men's equality in the home. And that's not just about sharing chores and responsibilities. It's also about, sharing in the relationship and the joy and the participation. That's my wish.
Thank you very much, Raina.
Easy peasy. That's perfect. That's okay.